In this Dragon Age Veilguard video, I'll be sharing my impressions from playing the game a few weeks ago during an exclusive hands-on event put together by Dragon Age. Dragon Age is one of my favorite franchises of all time, and Dragon Age Origins is in my top 5 games of all time, but I, like many fans, was initially shocked with the direction for Veilguard and had apprehension about how the game will turn out. Having now played the game some with a lot more information at hand, I feel like I'm now much better informed, so I want to share what I've learned with all of you from playing the game. Before we get into it, however, 2 warnings. 1, there are spoilers of previous games and some mild setting spoilers of very early game events. Skip to character creation if you don't want any of them. And 2, while I had fun attending the event and meeting the developer team, I hate traveling as it means very hectic long travel, waiting times, and days spent away from home, cooped up in a budget hotel. I didn't get any remuneration for this, and it cost me time and effort. I go to these things because I want to play and I want to be able to give a first-hand account of what you can expect. If you've been following Dragon Age Veilguard for a while, you're probably quite familiar with the setting and have knowledge of the events of the first few minutes of the game that trigger your adventuring. The game begins by explaining these events simply via zoom and pan animations with a Varric voiceover. The story setting is as follows. Dragon Age Veilguard is a culmination of Inquisition that opens up with Solas trying to tear down the Veilguard. For better or worse, you stop Solas in his quest, which imprisons Solas but releases 2 older gods who are seemingly hellbent on destroying the world, forcing Solas to act as a reluctant guide so you may rectify the situation. And as all this is developing, you don't get a clear-cut explanation as to who is bad or who is good, what their agenda is, etc., or if the actions you've taken are righteous or if they're misguided. I'm personally all for that, as moral ambiguity of this series and the complex choices that I had to make were one of the main factors that kept me coming back for more and more playthroughs of previous titles. During the gameplay, I got to see more of that morality and choice system play out in Dragon Age Veilguard, so I think for now, from my very basic interaction with this story, and not having been able to delve too deep as it was a limited demo, I think I'm actually on board with it shaping up to be good and what I want. The dialogues, however, are a separate thing. While the complex and interesting story of Dragon Age is there, I did feel like the initial situations I ran into were rather gamey, and that the dialogues were trying very hard to give me background information under the assumption that I'm a new player or have ignored the codex. This happens with returning series, and there aren't easy solutions for it, but I have no way to know if it's just the start of the game or if the writing stays average throughout. I often felt my responses had predetermined flavors of overly good, snarky, overly stoic, without additional nuance or depth that I have now come to expect from games like Pillars of Eternity, Pathfinder, Divinity Original Sin, or Baldur's Gate 3. You could simply conclude that those games are much further along the path of a CRPG, and that the aim of Dragon Age Veilguard is to give a more casual or accessible approach to RPGs, and if that is the aim, it's going to work for people looking for that. For me, so far, the dialogues were a weaker point of a story that I'm quite interested in. They aren't bad, but they just didn't feel good so far. We'll see how that plays out when we're further along in the plot with our full review. Now for something we really want, character creation and customization. This is such an important part of an RPG, and I spent a silly amount of time going over all the options because I couldn't help myself. First though, let me get it out there that I do not like the character models. They have weird proportions and conform to an art style and direction that in my opinion clashes with the facial features of the characters and creates a weird feeling of something not adding up. Having said that, I got over it quite quickly, and I'm very happy to report that there is a good amount of customization and tinkering to be done to get your Rook to look the way you want. You can pick from elf, Kunari, human, or dwarf and customize everything from your head shape to your nails, so you'll be able to recreate your Warden or Inquisitor if you so choose. Special mention to the incredibly intricate tattoo section of the character creator. I was actually quite impressed by them. I ended up with a giant forehead Kunari, it just happened, and it looks really silly every time I rewatch my gameplay, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing community creations for everyone's Rook, and I imagine some of them will look much better than mine. Next up, you'll be picking your class from the 3 typical options of Warrior, Mage, and Rogue. As is common with Dragon Age, each class has optional specializations that allow the player to narrow on a specific style of play within their given class, and if you haven't played before, think of these as subclasses. The Warrior is the bread and butter melee soldier of your party. You can pick to go sword and shield for tank roles, or focus on a heavier 2-handed DPS style. The specializations are familiar to returning players, Reaper, Slayer, and Champion, that act as Scythe Lifesteal, 2-handed Berserker, and tank roles, respectively. Mages are mostly elemental fighters using fire, ice, and lightning. They specialize as a Deathcaller, which is a ranged lifesteal build, evokers that focus on freezing and crushing enemies, or spellblades that use mostly lightning in close-range combat. Rogues can use bows or dual swords, and of course all about quick, lethal attacks. Rogues can specialize as duelists, gaining buffs from parrying and dodging, saboteurs who can set traps and crowd control from range or from afar, or Veil Rangers that use dangerous magic to pull off amazing sniping feats. I tried out the classes to get an idea of how they work, and we'll cover that in the gameplay section, but of course we weren't able to see the proper progression of all these completely just yet. Continuing with character customization, you'll be able to pick a background for your character. These backgrounds are tied to factions and will affect your conversation options, as well as other game elements such as reputation gain or combat effectiveness against specific types of enemies. There are 6 backgrounds to pick from, and if you're a returning player, you're probably going to be quite interested in this, as it does bring you into the Dragon Age feel to get all these options, as each of these choices has more in-depth backstory for your character. Your background faction is acknowledged, and your background events are mentioned as you play, so this is actually an important decision in a day and age where companies try to minimize these aspects so people don't feel trapped into an early game choice. The 6 factions are Grey Wardens, Veil Jumpers, Shadow Dragons, Lords of Fortune, Morn Watcher, and Antivan Crow. The last selection you'll make for your character before playing is the difficulty mode. I of course haven't had the chance to explore these in detail, but on the surface it does look like a good array of options. There are 6 difficulty settings to pick from, and they balance incoming damage, enemy aggression, tactical challenge, and defend timing. Diving into the actual gameplay of the game itself, you'll find yourself in control of Rook, and roaming a world that to me felt quite like Inquisition. As I entered my first few combat situations, I was immediately transported back to 2015 and had flashbacks of closing rifts by the dozens. It simply felt very, very familiar despite being quite new and different. Combat seems simple on the surface, but actually has a lot of mechanics running in the background that I don't think are easily seen in preview footage. The UI is quite simplistic, showing you basic skills and resources, and expands into a quite busy pause menu once you have unlocked more abilities and companions. The basics of combat are very standard. You'll deal light attacks as a combo with a final attack finisher, walk with your shield if you're a warrior, and be able to perform agile attacks by springing and light or heavy attacking. You can dodge and also perform a longer extended dodge by repeating the button press. You can also switch between weapon sets seamlessly in combat, so your sword and shield warrior can swap to a two-handed hammer mid-fight. Your class will determine a specific resource that you generate when attacking with your weapon, and it is consumed to use some of your special class abilities. The warrior, for example, generates rage and can accumulate 150 of it, and would use about 50 rage to perform a flying kick on an enemy. This ability is accessed via the pause menu and lets you specify who to use this skill on, so the hectic nature of battle doesn't have you flying in the wrong direction. But the skill itself reveals a bit more nuance when you have a look at its tooltip. It will show its cost and a specific amount of damage, a high amount of stagger, which will let you do a takedown move on an enemy you have staggered and will detonate weakened enemies. You can also perform this ability over and over as long as you have enough rage to spend. This already gives you a glimpse that there's more below the surface, which we found by going through the combat codex during the preview. I saw many status effects as expected, such as bleed, blighted, burning, chilled, necrotic, shocked, staggered, sundered, etc. These are returning from Inquisition or being added, with mechanics such as takedown and knockdown impacting defense or critical hits, etc. I also found that creatures have enhancements like the affixes found on Diablo Elites. There's a decently sized list of effects ranging from a magical orb floating around the enemy that deals electric damage, to sadistic enemies that regain health and increase their damage when their allies die. When you put all this together and consider 3-player classes, specializations, and companion abilities, you start to see a much bigger picture of how combat could come together and actually be quite engaging. There are 2 crucial components for it to actually be good, however, and the jury is of course still out on those, but we need to have a good skill tree, and we need to have good itemization so that builds and combat can be a big part of the fun. Starting with the skill tree, since I could actually see that. The skill tree is a hexagon with 3 exit points that go in opposite directions toward each of the 3 specializations. At the very center of the skill tree is the core of your class, which is the bread and butter skills that you begin the game with. From here, you'll navigate through an ample selection of active, passive, and greater passive skills that unlock special moves, change the way your resources are managed, or add effects to your actions based on enemy or player status. My warrior was feeling quite dull and underwhelming at the start of the session with limited ranged options and weak equipment, making me feel carried by my ranged companions. So I explored the warrior tree further and found that there are actually a lot of really cool options for special effects, gap closers, and even ranged and elemental attacks. Looking at the tree and at higher level characters, of which level 50 is the cap, actually made me quite excited, as build versatility is one of my top asks from games, and I'm already thinking through so many options to build up a warrior this or that way, wondering how this or that effect may synergize with other party members, that it has me very, very excited. I then swapped to a mage to see how different the game felt when playing, and it was actually a big and pleasant surprise. It's common for CRPG mages to be more or less stuck in place during battle, but I found I would stay on the move and enjoy flashy elemental animations that dealt great damage and didn't take an eternity to cast. I also tried the rogue, but unfortunately the footage corrupted, which is a real shame because it was very fun to play as well. In general, I enjoyed all archetypes, and it felt like they matched their roles well, but were not limited to a stoic version of those roles. So my warrior could perform ground-shaking, fire-exploding AoE feats, and my mage could deal a crushing blow with the staff. The mage skill tree had some incredible-looking spells down the line, and also sent me down the theory crafting path, and made me even more excited to play. Next up, I want to touch on itemization, equipment, and crafting. Dragon Age Veilguard has the expected color-coded gear system that you've seen pretty much constantly in RPGs of common, uncommon, rare, etc. You get 2 weapon sets, a helm, chest, 2 rings, a trinket, and a keepsake. You can also apply runes to a unique item that you're using throughout the game, and your companions have 1 weapon set, chest, a trinket, and a keepsake. Since this was the very start of the game, I didn't get any high-level loot to really determine how itemization will work, but even the early uncommon items had special locked bonuses that would seem to be available later on through some other means. It was mentioned by the developers that some gear scales to your faction reputation, for example. I also found references to schematics and picked up a lot of materials of different qualities, and we will be able to upgrade the quality of items. I think we'll be seeing a system similar to Inquisition for crafting equipment with specific bonuses. I feel like this is still too little information to know how much this will impact possible builds, but I am hopeful that when mixed with many effects and skills, there will be a pleasant degree of complexity for us build addicts out there. Aside from combat, the game is heavy on exploration and dialogues with intermittent cutscenes and animations to progress the plot. Exploration seems to have the elements you'd expect for the game. I saw some puzzles, discovered loot by exploring corners and small rooms, found some hidden collectibles by taking a couple of weird jumps, and collected a fair amount of codex notes that add flavor and vibrance to the world. Frankly, I got really into the whole thing, and it was easy to forget that this was a demo and I had limited time with it, which is a very good thing from a preview perspective, as it was successfully drawing me into the game. Final thoughts. I know that I've done a huge info dump so far, so I want to bring it all together now to give some final impressions and explain how this has left me feeling. As I said earlier in the video, I have been so torn with this title because I love the previous games, and I'm just so scared of what modern gaming is doing to development by making them focus on marketing instead of passion. During my time with the BioWare team, I got the impression that they're actually quite invested in respecting the story and lore of the series, but that they're also looking to open up this title to gamers who are not familiar or are fans of the franchise. The developer said that they appreciate that the world and companions are so important, and it's these things that have kept the series alive, so they have tried to give autonomy and realization to that world and characters, and that is partly why you can't directly control your companions. They also returned to a mission-based world instead of open because they felt it was a better way to tell a story, focus it, and make each location feel purposeful while still keeping exploration and discovery as options for player freedom. I asked questions about performance, game length, endings, and branching paths, romance, nudity, etc., and most of my questions got stonewalled by PR answers. We were reassured that all companions can be romanced, but they are not player sexual and have their own fleshed out romantic histories and preferences, but stop short of saying some characters may turn you down if you don't meet their criteria. The only juicy morsel I got was it's M-rated for a reason when asking if we're getting sex scenes with full nudity like Baldur's Gate 3. I doubt there are bears included, but you never know. Choose your dialogue options carefully. The Q&A session in general would have left me feeling quite unsatisfied if I had not had a chance to play as much as I did, but the reality is that my time with the game was worth so much more than any dev response could have promised me. I got to see and experience myself getting drawn into the world that I love with familiar and unfamiliar locations, events, and characters. I walked away from the demo wanting to play more, wishing it was out, and thinking about all the things I wanted to try. It actually did a great job of making me way more interested than I was before I first grabbed the controller, and it's moving my apprehension needle down a bit. I still have issues with the game, mainly that I don't like the UI and that the dialogues didn't seem to be on par with what you could get in other story-focused games that have come out in the last decade, and that I didn't yet get a point where I felt a bond or much interest with my companions who are integral to the story. It's funny that I have pretty much been playing these games for the story and getting through the combat, but I may actually be playing the Veilguard to enjoy the combat and get through the story to see the end. How everything works together and progresses into a full game remains to be seen, and there were several big and impactful events that I cannot discuss, but so far my opinion on this has become more positive, and I would like to urge anyone who loves CRPGs to hang in there and wait for reviews and not write the game off just yet. I'll be making more content covering other updates as embargoes lift, and I have a special video coming with a history of the 3 games, so you can catch up or refresh your memory if you don't quite remember everything about the Dragon Age universe. So what do you think after seeing all the new gameplay and previews coming out today? Are you getting more excited, less excited? Will you be keeping an eye out for their reviews? Will you be pre-ordering? What do you think of Dragon Age the Veilguard now? Let me know in the comments below.